connected. I was just kind of hanging on here, hoping that we'd get a couple more. But I'd almost say, throughout the presentation here, we don't have that large of a group. So if anybody wants to ask a question during the presentation, I think we could do that as long as we keep moving forward a little bit. Or you can also, on the slide you're seeing right now, should say, give you some information. Oh, the agenda is not right, Brad. You didn't change any of that. So the presentation is on swarm prevention and control. I'm going to be talking about Varroa mites today. So you can either raise your hand during the meeting with Zoom, or you can send an email to the Ask Omaha-Bee-Club .com. I'm trying to find my my laser pointer here. There we go. Yeah, right there. All right, so today I basically stole a bunch of slides from other people that know a lot more than me and pulled them together. I wanted to spend some time talking about the Varroa mite, and they are massively irritating, and they're something that every beekeeper really needs to have a handle on. If you don't lose your bees the first year, you're probably going to lose them the second year from Varroa mites. They're that bad. But having said that, I guess I'll ask a question up front. What is the most likely killer of your bees? Well, in my opinion, it's the beekeeper. There's just a lot of things we do to bees. One of the things bees want to do most is swarm, and we try and prevent that. If we see queen cells, some people destroy the queen cells. We go through and reverse the hives top to bottom in the spring, or we tear the hive apart every week just looking through the frames just so we can see the queen. Then we throw a bunch of chemicals in, and at the end of the summer, we take all their honey and substitute in some cheap sugar syrup as a substitute. So there's a lot of things we're doing to the bees that aren't necessarily normal for them that we think is better for them, that may or may not be good. So a lot of times we, the beekeeper, are doing a fair amount of damage. But if we don't kill them, the Varroa mite will. And they're very aptly named Varroa Destructor because they're extremely destructive on honeybees. So this slide right here, I would really consider the most valuable slide of the entire presentation. I tried to pull together all the various links that I borrowed screens from, the screenshots on YouTube videos, downloaded other people's PowerPoint presentations. We've got information from Randy Oliver's website. If you didn't get it already, it's in your email that announced this meeting. You can go to the OBC website under the About Downloads, and you can download this presentation. So you have all these links. It'll be in a PDF file. So I strongly encourage you to download the presentation. As we go through this slide key over here on the right, this is the background color of slides. Anything that has this parchment paper look is just a slide that I made up. There's not very many that I actually did. The blue and the green ones are from Dr. Marion Ellis. He was kind enough to share some Varroa mite slides with me. Kind of this little bluish one is from a really excellent series of presentations by Ralph Buchler from Germany, the Crocheting Bee Institute, that he gave at the National Honey Show in Great Britain. And I have a fair number of slides from there. Some nice videos from Megan Milbrath from Michigan State University. Randy Oliver really has a lot of information on his scientific beekeeping site. So I've got a few links to his information on Varroa mites. Kind of late in the game, I got a hold of Judy Wu Smart's presentation, and I think this is the same one she gave to us in February at the Bee Club meeting. Lots of good information there too. So there's good 15 hours of information here. If you watch these YouTube videos or go through some of these websites, I would highly encourage you to do that. It's really your responsibility as a beekeeper to learn about Varroa mites. You're only going to get 50, 60 minutes with Brad Price today, and that ain't going to cut it. I'm going to give you some very introductory information, but to really understand the context behind some of these slides that I'm going to show you, I strongly encourage you to check out these links and watch these videos. I found them very, very helpful. All right, so we're going to start off with some of Marion's information. He had a very nice presentation on using oxalic acid for treating Varroa. The beginning part of this presentation that I stole some slides from, it's really giving some information about the Varroa mite and its life cycle. I think it's very important to understand your enemy in order to defeat it. And so we're going to talk about how Varroa goes about its life and when it's the worst, at the worst risk for our bees. So its scientific name is Varroa destructor, and the destructor really is true. It was first detected in the US in 1987, but prior to that, it was discovered in 1904 as a parasite of another type of honeybee, Apis cerana, which is the Asian honeybee. It made the jump to Apis mellifera, which is our common honeybee that we have here in the US, that we all have in our hives, in the 1940s. It's an obligate parasite, which means it needs the honeybee to complete its life cycle. It doesn't feed on wasps or bumblebees or anything else. It's specific to honeybees. And as far as I know, only the Apis cerana and the Apis mellifera honeybees. The big problem when Varroa mite came is it really just spread like wildfire across the U.S. because we transport bees all over the place. So most of the feral bee population was exposed very rapidly after it was introduced in 1987, and a very large amount of that feral bee population has succumbed to Varroa mites. I think injury is kind of a light term as far as talking about managed bees. A lot of colonies are lost and die every year from Varroa mites. So it's a pretty serious deal. So here is probably the easiest picture you'll ever see of a Varroa mite, and this looks like probably a drone pupa that was pulled out of a cell. The Varroa mites, most of them in your hive are going to be underneath the capped brood. That's where they breed and reproduce. And when the bee emerges, then there'll be several adult Varroa mites that come out of that cell with them. And here you can see there's 5 of them just on this pupa alone. And it almost looks like a horror movie to me. And the size of the Varroa mite is really quite large compared to the honeybee. This would be as if you had a tick, maybe 6 inches across on your backside. So you can imagine that what it feels like for the bees having these very large parasites attacking them. One of the things that makes Varroa such a difficult parasite to control is that it actually has somewhat of a close relationship to honeybees. So things that kill mites also kill honeybees. So it's very difficult to find those types of treatments that will not harm the honeybees too. As compared to most host-parasite relationships, you might have a tick on a dog or a tick on a cow. So you're dealing with an insect or a mite with a mammal. So in those cases, they're a different enough organism that the treatments are more easily found. So here's another picture of a Varroa mite. Maybe just I'll give everybody a few seconds to find the Varroa mite in this picture. I don't know if you can see the red arrow there. So this right here, that's the back end of a Varroa mite sticking out. And this is where they're most commonly going to be when they're on your bees that are outside the cells. This is what they call the phoretic mites when they're not in the cell but on the bees. They go in between the segments on the bee's abdomen and they're attached underneath that segment there. So a lot of people, they'll say, oh, I've never seen mites on my bees. Well, this is why. They're extremely difficult to see, even in a close-up view like this. What you will see, though, if you've got a good number of mites in your bees, is you see bees run around your hive to have these shriveled up wings. That's deformed wing virus. That's one of many viruses that Varroa mites vector into your bees. And that's some of the real damage that Varroa mite causes, is not necessarily the direct parasitic action of sucking the resources out of a bee's body, but they carry viruses, and those viruses are very harmful. With deformed wing virus, obviously this bee is never going to fly. I don't know if it's able to do any of the nurse bee jobs when it's first born or not, but it's a defective bee nonetheless. And if you see those running around your hive, very many of them, chances are you've got a pretty good number of Varroa mites. So that's just a little bit of background on the mites themselves. I'm going to jump over to some slides from Ralph Buechler. from the Crocheting Bee Institute in Germany. This set of videos I just love. They're really, really good. I highlighted this one because this is where I stole most of my slides from today. I think there's one out of this first one up here. I would highly recommend everybody watch all 4 of these videos. If nothing else, the guy's fun to listen to with his German accent. So he's a pretty fun guy. And what he presents in his sustainable Varroa management, I feel is just some really, really good information for helping you to understand the Varroa mite. So the first slide I stole from him is a little bit about Apis cerana. Again, this is not our honeybee. This is the Asian honeybee that lives in Southeast Asia. The Varroa mites and the Apis cerana, they co-evolved over many thousands of years and they have a stable host-parasite relationship, which means that Apis cerana knows how to deal with the Varroa mite, and they're not going to die typically from a Varroa mite infestation. They have various traits that they've adapted over the years that allows them to survive Varroa mite infestations. Apis cerana and Apis mellifera are 2 entirely separate species, so there's no crossbreeding that you can do to try and get those traits into our honeybees, nor would we want to introduce those bees to the US. That'd be like an invasive introduction. And from what I understand, Apis cerana really doesn't form a large colony and produce a large amount of honey either. So we really want to try and figure out how do we get Apis mellifera, our honeybees, to deal with mites. This is really where the light clicked for me quite a bit, and this is in Ralph's presentation. One of the things I tried to do, so here you can see the title of the presentation. These are just screenshots from his YouTube video. So this is that part 3 or 4 that I had highlighted. And down here is your timestamp that tells you that we were about 6 minutes into this presentation when he started talking about this slide. So if you want to go to his YouTube presentation and go to here, he'll give you a much better interpretation of this slide than I will, and much more background information. But basically this black line, this is your number of brood cells in your hive times 10. So as we're going up this line, we get up to here, here in May, they're talking about around 35,000 brood cells in your hive. This is not the number of bees, this is the number of capped brood cells. So that starts going down, but even still, there's a very large number of bees still emerging. So the bee population is actually continuing to go up here for a while, even though the queen is laying fewer per week or per day as we get into later summer. This blue line down here, this is the Varroa mite population level. And you can see as we get into July and August, it really starts to climb up right when the bees are starting to go down. And that's really is a critical time of the year for us as beekeepers and for the honeybees. This red dashed line here is the relative brood infestation. So that's saying what percentage of the brood are infested with Varroa mites. And it's actually a logarithmic scale here because it would literally go off the charts here if it's made a regular scale. But you can see we go from 1.4% in June. Up here, we're at 8% in August, 24% September. So it's that crossing as the bees are reducing their population or their amount of brood cells, the Varroa mites are greatly increasing at that time. And this is what really causes a severe problem with our hives in late summer. So another slide that he talked about a few minutes later is what we should learn from natural swarming, because swarming is something that the bees want to do. A healthy hive, they want to reproduce, as Brad talked about last month, and that's part of their natural process. Well, when a swarm is issued from a hive, both that swarm and the mother hive, they both have a brood break, which means there are no brood for a while, because the hive that was left behind, they have a queen cell that has to emerge, she has to mature, go on mating flights, come back, and start laying again, which really interrupts the brood cycle of the Varroa mite. So at this point, you can see the brood goes down almost to 0, probably is 0 right in here. And it causes, instead of the Varroa mites going way up like this, it flattens their curve out a little bit. And you can see this relative brood infestation. It really knocks it down in that July going into August timeframe. So we don't have as many Varroa mites after a swarm as we did if we would have prevented that swarm. So as Brad talked about, there's various things you can do to deal with swarming, but letting it happen in a controlled way where you reduce the brood can be beneficial to you. This slide here, the very interesting thing to me is this winter bee development. And again, this is a light that went on for me here in the last year or so. Here's a couple, these two lines here, Ralph was comparing classical and near natural treatment, but these two lines are various populations of bees. So he's showing or actually the relative brood infestation. So he's showing one example where the brood infestation went really high because we didn't do anything to treat the mites until later on in the year. And here's a case where he calls it near natural, which simulates a swarm. The relative brood infestation goes down really low in July. The reason this is also very important is in August and September is when your winter bees are developed by your hive. These are very, very, very important bees because they're the ones that will survive through the winter for you. Most worker bees only live for 4 to 6 weeks during the summer while they're out foraging and doing work. The winter bees are very special bees. They're physiologically different. They make bigger fat reserves, and they're the ones that will live through the winter for you. So if these winter bees in August and September, if they have viruses and a high number of Varroa mites, they're going to be weakened, and they're not going to make it through the winter. So a lot of you, if you have a hive that's kind of making it through the winter and then all of a sudden it keels over in February and you wonder why, it may not be the cold, it may not be that they're out of food, it may just be that those winter bees finally exhausted their ability to live because they were weakened from viruses. And so this time frame right here, August and September, that's when you really care about having low levels of mites. I'm going to back up one slide because something that was important back here, one of the reasons you don't care as much about Varroa mites in the beginning of spring, first of all, you typically have a low level coming out of winter, but the queen is laying so many eggs so fast that she's outstripping the ability of the mites to reproduce. So there's many thousands of eggs going down every day, but just a few hundred mites at that point. So at that point, the mites really aren't doing a whole lot of damage to your hive unless you would have a really high population in spring, which would be a little bit unusual. Did I have that right slide up on the winter bee development, or was I talking to, I see two slides when I do this. Did you guys see this slide?
Yeah, you had the right one up.
Okay, good. And I'm trying to use this preview mode on PowerPoint, and it shows me the next slide too, so I never know if I'm looking at the right one. So one way you can deal with mites or address the situation is by causing a brood break, and similar to what a swarm would do. And Ralph does a really interesting discussion on this. These cages, these are queen cages that basically look like they're made out of queen excluder material, and they're made by a company in Italy. And what they do is he puts the queen in this cage at the beginning of July, and leaves her there to cause a brood interruption. He actually recommends leaving her in the cage for 25 days, which I really think is too long. I don't fully understand what he's trying to accomplish with 25 days. But nonetheless, I think this is one interesting way of doing it. I actually contacted the company in Italy, and I got a case of these cages, so I'm going to try them out this year. I have a few extra if anybody's interested. I'll sell them at cost to you. But what he does after that caging period, he releases the queen, but now he's got a brood-free colony. So at that point, you can do a single treatment, and he uses oxalic acid at that point. Since there is no brood, the dribble treatment, a single dribble treatment, and we'll talk about how to treat later, really knocks down your mites. The rest of his discussion on this was queen caging. He actually does a method where when the queen is released, actually before she's released, he puts in a frame of brood. So it's the only frame of brood in that whole hive. And the mites that are out are desperate for someplace to go lay their eggs and mate. So they will all go to that single brood frame, and when they're capped over, then he pulls that brood frame out and freezes it, and he's essentially trapped and killed a very large percentage of the mites in his hives. And that's how he manages his own personal hives without any chemical treatment. Go to his video if you want to hear more about that. I'm going to go this route, I think, where I'm going to cage the queens, not for 25 days, I don't think. It's going to be a shorter time frame, and then come along with the treatment, or perhaps requeen at that time too. All right, let me get a sip here. I'm going to jump back to some of Dr. Ellis's slides here. I really liked this slide as it shows kind of what's going on with the Varroa life cycle, both in the worker brood and the drone brood. So this line right along here is your number of days. So the drones and the workers both spend 3 days as eggs, then they hatch, they turn into larvae. Around day 9 is when the worker brood is capped or sealed over. And day 10 or 11 is when the drone brood is sealed over. The Varroa mites enter the cell just before it's capped. One or more female Varroa mites enters that. And after it's capped, they'll feed for 60 to 70 hours. And then the Varroa mite, the female, will lay 1 egg. And that first egg is almost always a male. And then she'll lay another egg every 30 hours. So here you can see various, and those additional eggs are all female. It takes a while for those mite eggs then to hatch and mature. But once they all come out, that male actually mates with his sisters inside the cell, so to speak. I don't understand how Varroa survives all the inbreeding consequences of that, but they do. So the difference is a drone brood takes 24 days before it emerges. A worker brood comes out in 21 days. So you can see not as many eggs are laid during the time frame for a worker bee as they are for a drone bee. And you have to have time for those mites to mature. If they're not mature when the bee emerges, they'll die. So typically, in a worker brood, maybe only these first 2 mites will survive to maturity when the bee emerges. You might get 2 or 3 of drone brood. And that's why the mites prefer drone brood. Since there is a longer capped period, more mites can reproduce, and you'll have a much higher increase in your number of mites. So you're basically tripling every brood cycle. I really like this slide too. This kind of talks a little bit about how the Varroa population grows over time based on different starting numbers. It's a logarithmic, an exponential growth in the mites population. So if you start out with only 10 at day 0, it takes a while before you're up to 400, 180 days, half a year. So if you have very, very low count starting out, it takes a while for them to grow. But if you start out with 100 or 200, you're further down the curve already, or further up the curve. And you can see things really start accelerating after just a couple months here, 2 or 3 months. You've got some very high populations of mites. So you need to be aware of that as a beekeeper, that it's important to understand how many mites you have in your hive at various times of the year. This slide here talks about what happens if invasion occurs. And it's a Varroa mite invasion. And there's 2 ways really that can happen to your hive. One is if there's drifting of bees between hives, and that happens a lot for us because we all stack our hives in very close to each other. So if one hive has a lot of mites, the next one doesn't. Some worker bees are getting lost, but they drift from hive to hive, and they might be carrying mites from one hive to the other. The other thing that's really much more of a large invasion is what we call mite bombs. So if you have a hive that has a very high mite infestation, and it's in the process of dying or becomes so weak that it gets robbed out, all the bees that are in there robbing that hive out, they're then carrying mites back to their home hive. So if one of your hives dies, or one of your neighbor's hives is dying and your bees rob it out, your mite population is going to explode. And that puts you up on the red line instead of down on the green line. So this is why it's very important for all of us to control mites in our own hives, not just so you don't lose your bees, but you don't want to affect your neighbor's bees. And here's kind of another take on the same lines here. If you do have a mite population that's going up, I'm going to move this a little bit. If you apply Varroa or some type of a treatment to get rid of the mites, if you have a 99% effective treatment, you stay pretty low. If your treatment's 90% effective, it's pretty good. If it's only 80% effective, it's not going to be long before your mite population is back up. Many of the treatments for mites have various effectiveness rates, and it can depend on how well you use that treatment or follow the instructions or what the weather's like, whether you're going to get that 99% or 90% or 80% treatment. Just because you put some chemicals in your hive doesn't mean they're going to work. There we go. So there's a couple ways you can tell what's going on with your hives. If you have a colony that dies, if you look at those frames in the hive, if you see, it's a little bit hard to see on this slide, but this is a very zoomed in picture. This is basically mite feces, and it's deposited on the ceiling of the cells in the comb where the Varroa mites were mating and reproducing. You can see more in here, kind of reflections. I'm going to go to the next slide. It's a little bit better picture. So you see all these bright white spots? That's all Varroa feces. And again, those are going to be on the ceiling of your cells. So if you have a frame, or if you have a hive that died, pull out a frame of empty comb that's now empty, hold it so that the top is away from you and the bottom is towards you, so that you're looking into the ceiling of that cell that was at the top when it was in the hive. And if you see a lot of cells that have white spots in them, that means you probably had a fairly significant Varroa population at the time. So let's talk about Varroa monitoring and treatment. I'm a big believer that you need to monitor, and then if you turn out results that say you have mice, you can treat, and then monitor again. And the reason why, some people say, well, why don't you just treat? Because most of our hives have Varroa anyhow. A couple of reasons why I think you would not want to. If you have a hive that has a very, very low mite population, for whatever reason, if you treat that hive, you're adding chemicals unnecessarily to your hive. That also, the more times we put chemicals on Varroa mites, the more chances we have of resistance developing. So I think it's important not to treat if you don't need to. The other reason that monitoring is important is to determine how effective was your treatment. If you treated and you went from, say you had 20 mites per 300 bees in your hive, and you still had 20 mites after you treated, that means for whatever reason, your treatment didn't work and your hive is still at risk. So I strongly encourage you to learn how to monitor, and we're going to talk about that here in a second. Do your treatment, and we'll talk about some treatments later on, and then monitor again so you know if you were successful. Probably the two main ways to monitor these days are what's called an alcohol wash or a sugar roll. And both of those will allow you to take a sample of bees, and usually the standard is 300 bees, which is a half cup of bees. If you have 9 mites or more in that sample of 300 bees, that's usually a sign that you need to treat. If you're going to treat, there's various ways of doing it. There's chemical methods. Some of those are considered organic, some are not organic. Some of them, or most of them, you should not have your honey supers on when you do them. And there's non-chemical methods like we talked about introducing a brood break or causing encaging your queen to cause a brood break. Some of the methods that Brad talked about last month on swarm control, you can do a split in such a way that you introduce a brood break. So those are all good non-chemical methods and the trapping frames that Ralph Buechler talked about in his YouTube presentation. There are ways to control Varroa mites without tossing chemicals in your hive. So assuming your colony is still alive, we'll call this a live colony assessment. Sugar roll is one of the main ways you can test for mites. And Dr. Ellis actually helped develop this a number of years ago. I put a link on here that has very specific instructions for how to do this test. There are some very specific things to do, like letting the jar sit for several minutes to make sure the bees heat up and cause the mites to drop off. So I strongly encourage you to find some good instructions, and this is one set here, this link. But basically, it's a mason jar with a screened lid, and you put your 300 bees in there, you put some powdered sugar on it, you roll it around, you let it set for a while, and then you turn it upside down and shake, and the mites will fall out. And then you can count how many mites you had in those 300 bees. And here you can see they had a lot. I like to use like a white cereal bowl or something, and I'll mist it with a spray bottle. It's much easier for me to see the mites when they come out with the powdered sugar. Another method of doing a live colony assessment is with the alcohol wash. Now, when I say live colony assessment, we're going to kill 300 bees. With the sugar roll, those bees live. You can toss them back into the hive, and they're just fine. They're coated with powdered sugar, but their friends all love them because they'll eat the powdered sugar. In this method, the alcohol wash does kill the 300 bees, and you feel pretty bad about that when you first start doing this, but you're doing it for the betterment of the hive. Beehive is a superorganism. The bees they all sacrifice their lives at one point or another. So these 300 are quite the soldiers that we're going to do this test on. And again, I mainly just gave you links here of how to do this. I really liked, we got this Varroa Easy Check kit last year. It's kind of pricey at 20 bucks, but it's a nice plastic container with a mesh insert that you put the bees and the alcohol in, and it really makes it easy to see the number of mites that wash out with the alcohol. I find it a lot easier than the sugar roll, but it's certainly up to you. Both methods work well. Any questions at this point? While I get a drink to clear my throat.
So Brad, have you used the Easy Check itself?
Yeah, we used it last year.
Okay.
And one of it is very shocking. Sometimes you're not sure you always want to get the answer to a question you ask, but one of our apiaries, my opinion is they got mite bombed. I'm not sure, but we went out there, and granted it was late. We were in August already before we got around to checking last year. And we had some colonies that had 50, 60 mites per 300 bees. And that's the only place I've lost beehives in the last 3 years, was that apiary. So I'm suspecting they either had a big population going in or got mite bombed, because everything out there had very high populations. The scientific beekeeping guy, he also has kind of a homemade kit where you can use clear plastic cups. But this Varroa Easy Check really is a lot less messy, I found. So let's talk a little bit about oxalic acid. That's one of the more popular treatments that is used today. It was approved a few years ago in the United States, had been used for quite some time before that in Europe. But it's a natural organic acid. It's a defensive chemical that exists in plants and insects as a repellent. And you often have heard rhubarb mentioned, probably most likely with it. But certainly other crops have oxalic acid in them. Various insects produce oxalic acid to protect them from predators. And there can be various amounts in your vegetables of what you have. Some vegetables have a pretty high amount, and you want to be careful not to eat too large of an amount of certain vegetables, because too much oxalic acid is not a good thing. Some of the other things, though, the oxalic acid, it is a natural constituent of honey, fairly small amounts. Many vegetables contain far more oxalic acid than honey does. So there's a fairly low risk of the residues that you'll have in your honey. And oxalic acid is also hydrophilic, which means it dissolves in water, so it does not collect in the beeswax, unlike other chemicals. There's a couple methods of application. You can do the trickle or the evaporating method. Europe and Canada seem to do a lot more of the trickling. Done properly, you should have an effectiveness greater than 90%. So remember those curves we talked about earlier on the graphs. You want to have a very high rate of effectiveness. And at this point, they're not entirely sure how it's killing the mites. There's some theories out there, but I don't know that they've actually proven exactly how the oxalic acid kills the mites. But it works, and done properly, it works pretty well. So here's some directions for use that we're going to go through. And again, I wouldn't take just our word for it on this presentation. I would go to the Randy Oliver website too. And whenever you're putting chemicals in your hive, you want to make sure you're doing it the right way. But for trickling, one of the standard methods is you take 35 grams of oxalic acid, 1 liter of lukewarm sugar water in a 1-to-1 solution. And typically, you're going to do this in late autumn or early spring when there's little or no brood present. And the reason why is if there's no brood present, all the mites are exposed. So if you try doing this on a colony that has a lot of capped brood, you're just wasting your time and you're putting chemicals on the bees that you don't need to. So typically you're looking for a time when it's 35 to 55 degrees. I like to do mine around Thanksgiving weekend. It seems to be, you catch a decent day around then. And the bees are going to kind of be in a loose cluster, which means that when you dribble that oxalic acid on them, you're going to get it on all the bees. And you certainly want to wear protective equipment. Even though I talked about oxalic acid being a naturally occurring organic acid, you don't want to be getting this in your eyes or in your mouth or on your skin or anything. So make sure, I don't have a slide in here specifically on safety equipment, but make sure you read up and dress appropriately for these kind of things. You always want to mix up your oxalic acid solution fresh. You don't want to keep it for more than a week. Otherwise, it undergoes some chemical changes that it's not any good. Make sure you have a reasonably strong colony, not a weak or starving colony. And you're going to use 1-to-1 syrup, not thick syrup. If there's brood present, you're kind of wasting your time again. And again, you want to be below 55 when they're loosely clustered. And you shouldn't have any supers in when you do this either. You want all the bees down in the brood boxes so you can trickle the syrup right on top of them. So here's a couple examples of it. Over here is a pail or a container that has the oxalic acid solution in it, getting pulled up into a syringe, and you trickle 5 milliliters of this oxalic acid solution. It's what they call on a seam of bees. So it's basically where you see bees between the frames. So you're trickling that on that, and it's going to dribble down all over the bees and stick to their bodies. And you want to do every frame where you see bees in between. If there's no bees out here on the outside, then you don't need to trickle there. And it goes pretty quick. Especially if you have somebody out there helping you to lift if you have 2 brood boxes, to lift the first brood box off, you can trickle the bottom one. They put the top one back on, you trickle it. You're in and out of a hive in a couple minutes. Even though it's 35 to 55 degrees out, it's not harmful to your bees because you're not pulling the frames out. You're in and out pretty quick, and they can warm right back up. So this is some information I had from a previous presentation. This again is just some different things, equipment you might need for the oxalic acid dribble. First is the oxalic acid itself. You can buy it from Dadant directly. It's $8 for a 35-gram package. And then remember, that's what we said, would mix up a batch. This would treat about 20 hives, and it's $8. So it's about 40 cents a hive to buy the oxalic acid from Dadant. You can also, oxalic acid is the same thing as wood bleach. And I use this right here, mainly because it gives me a larger quantity that's easy to store. I would say, however, this is not certified. If you want to be completely 100% legal with your bees, you should buy the oxalic acid from a certified supplier. This is not certified for use. So if you're selling honey commercially or anything like that, just be aware that this is not approved as a treatment for mites to use this. The other thing I like to use is I found this calibrated syringe from a veterinary supply. Actually, it is in the veterinary section at TSC, Tractor Service Supply, or Tractor Service Center, Tractor Supply Center, I think. And what's really nice about this syringe, and you can't see it here, but it's got little calibrations on it. You can set it to 5 milliliters. So every time you squeeze this trigger, it dispenses 5 milliliters right as you go down the seam and automatically resets. And the next time you squeeze it, you get 5 again. So it's way easier to make sure you're not overdosing your bees. And a digital scale, these things are cheap, 10, 15 bucks off of Amazon. You absolutely have to have a scale. You want to make sure you get the right amount of oxalic acid when you're mixing up your batch. I'm going to shift gears to Randy Oliver's website. There is just a ton of information on his site. But this is on this page right here, he has a table for the various recipes, if you will, for mixing up oxalic acid. If you're treating your bees in the winter time, like the late fall or early spring, when it's a broodless period and it's chilly, you're going to want to use this weak solution recipe. Even within that highlighted, here's the 35 grams with 600 mils of water and 600 grams of sugar. That's the same thing we saw in the previous slide that makes about enough solution to treat 20 hives. But it's very important that you can weigh out that 35 grams. These stronger recipes, I don't mess with that myself. You can read through Randy's information, but this is what you're going to want to be looking at for a late fall or early spring treatment. And here's the link to that up here. About a solution to apply, again, we're putting down 5 milliliters per frame of bees. So if you just have a nucleus, that should be no more than 30 milliliters. A single story colony should be about 40 milliliters, and a double story colony, 50 milliliters. Again, you probably don't have bees all the way to the outside if they're loosely clustered. So you're not hitting every frame necessarily. So part of how the oxalic acid syrup works is it's not consumed by the bees to kill the mites. In fact, if you spill some syrup that's got the oxalic acid in it, it'll probably still be there the next day because the bees don't like it. We mix it up in a syrup solution because the syrup is sticky and it sticks to the bees. So when you trickle it on, going down that seam of bees, it's getting sticky all over the bees, and that's how it ends up getting on the mites. If you didn't use a sugar syrup and only put the oxalic acid in water, it would just dribble right off and you would not have accomplished anything at all. The other way that people can do oxalic acid treatment is with the vaporization. How are we doing for time here? Not too bad. So it takes 1 gram of oxalic acid to do a single deep or 2 grams for a double deep, and a quarter teaspoon is about 1 gram. I will tell you that oxalic acid vaporization is something you really need to be super careful with. You do not want to breathe these vapors. You need to get a respirator. You need to make sure you're standing upwind when you're treating, and eye protection, the whole 9 yards. This can do some nasty damage to you when it's a vapor. But when you do use it, you want to seal the entrances while treating and for 15 minutes post-treatment to keep all that vapor inside the hive. After you're done, you disconnect, allow your tool. I'm going to show you the tool here in a second to cool off. And then once it's cooled off, you can reload for the next hive. And it goes pretty quick too. This is a picture of what you use for oxalic vaporization. These 2 leads right here connect to your to a battery that you haul out to wherever your bees are at, and when that's connected, this heats up. You put your oxalic acid in right here. It heats up and then vaporizes to treat your bees. Again, you do not want your honey supers on when you do this either. So make sure to take that into account. I want to say safety, safety, safety one more time. I cannot express enough that you don't want to be foolish with the vapors on this. So please, please read some of the links that I have on the presentation and educate yourself before you just go out and start doing this. It's not something to kid around with.
Hey, Brad, just while you're on that slide, can you talk for just a second about the crucible, if it comes in contact with wax there too, when you're on the safety bandwagon?
I haven't had it happen yet, and I hope I never do. One of my fears is that, so this gets pretty hot as it's heating up, while you're sticking it in a hive with a bunch of flammable material, wax. So I'm not really sure how to address that. I really want to look more into that. You want to make sure you don't want to have any comb hanging down off below your frames where you stick this into the entrance of your hive. There are other methods of blowing the vapor into your hives. There's different types of tools to use, but again, that's a good point, Brad. You want to be careful. it kind of scares me when I use this, and I think I'm going to look into it more this year before we do it, of how to make sure I'm not contacting any wax. Anybody else have experience or more knowledge on that?
That I know that vaporizer, it will heat up to about 1,750 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that it burned a hole in my bottom board. I put it in there too many times.
Yeah, Brad, I saw a presentation last weekend about the same thing, and they just basically said, hey, when you slide the wand in there, if it comes into contact with something, you'll notice it. So just make sure when you're putting it in that it's not in contact with anything. So just just an extra note of caution as you're doing it.
Okay, good points. All right.
I personally have one that is made out of aluminum and a glow plug from a car. And it works a whole lot better. Don't leave any burn marks or anything like this one here does.
Yeah. So there's a variety of these out there. It's a little bit of the Wild West as far as who's selling these. Again, you're going to be talking about you're taking a little bit of a chance whether you're getting a good piece of equipment or not. I would go through a Dedant or a Man Lake if you want to buy something like this. Some of the stuff on Amazon looks a little sketchy to me. So again, be careful and just kind of watch what you're doing with this. A lot of people are doing it. I haven't heard of any hives going up in flames, but I don't want to either. All right, I'm going to shift gears again. We're done talking about oxalic acid. Let's talk a little bit about if you want to do a brood break. Here's more caging information, and this is from Dr. Ellis's slide. So just a little bit more of a visual explanation. Day 1 is when you cage the queen. He has you releasing her on day 14, and then at that point, she'll start laying again at some time here after you release her from the cage, and then you actually treat on day 21 because she's laying new eggs and brood throughout here, and they won't be capped until you're out here till day 9 or so. So you can release the queen as early as day 14 and still treat on day 21. And at that point, most of your drone brood, any drone brood that was laid day 1, they should all be emerged. I'm a little bit, I might go to day 16 or 17. I'm not quite sure yet. Ralph Buchler and the guy in Germany, he was way out here at day 25 from the queen. And again, I don't fully understand why they were going so long. So even the experts, $16 or something, that might depend on my calendar. You can also create a brood break by requeening. Or you can remove the queen on day 1. You're not caging her, you're actually taking her out of the hive. You want to go in there and get rid of any emergency cells on day 4 and 8. On day 8, you can put in a ripe queen cell, and then you can treat on day 21, because at that point the new queen she should just be starting to lay. So you've got a broodless hive there again at day 21. But you have to have a ripe queen cell too. So maybe someday we'll do a little. We need to start teaching people how to raise their own queen cells, because it's an interesting process.
So Brad, you may want to point out that there's a difference between just doing a brood break and doing a brood break with treatment. So what you're talking about now is a brood break with treatment. Earlier, you talked about just doing a brood break.
I did, and just a brood break alone will help. A brood break with a treatment really, I'm going to switch back and forth here. Both of those were treatment. A brood break with treatment is really going to help a lot. It makes your treatment way more effective. You've got all the mites exposed. You don't have anything in the capped brood because you don't have any capped brood. And you can do a single oxalic acid vaporization here on this day 21 and take care of everything with one treatment. If you do the oxalic vaporization during the summer when you've got brood, if you read through the instructions from Randy Oliver or whoever, you have to do it for 3 weeks in a row, because the vapor does not penetrate the caps. So the mites that are underneath the wax caps of the brood, they're totally unaffected by the oxalic acid vapor. So you need to treat at least 3 weeks in a row as that new brood continues to emerge and more mites are coming out. So that's kind of the benefit of having a brood break, is you only have to get out and treat once then at the end. But you have to be able to find your queen and all that kind of stuff too. All right, one other person I found, I thought really good information from was Megan Milbroth from Michigan State University. She got me hooked with her first video here, because everybody, you're just sick when you lose a hive and you don't know what caused it. And so she kind of goes through some of what's happening. But the bottom line is most of us, I think, are losing hives because of mites. There could be other things going on, but the chances are mites were involved. She talks a little bit about Varroa risk. This making a plan for Varroa mite. This video is longer. Honestly, it had so much information in it. I had a headache at the end, but it was good. It was a good headache. It was good information. I had a hard time absorbing it all, and I think I need to go back and watch it a couple times, because she kind of went through the various types of treatments and different times that treatments would be more effective than others. She did summarize it all up in a flow chart, and kind of gave you some questions to ask yourself to tell you which treatment you would want to use. So she started up here saying, if it's early in the season and you're a person that's good with hive manipulation, you can do some of these things like drone brood removal or splits or doing a break in the brood cycle. But if it's not early in the season, then it's like, is the colony broodless? Well, that means we're in late fall or early spring. Then you can do the oxalic acid. If it's not broodless, if it's big and strong, if it's got honey supers, you might do some of these treatments. Excuse me, honey supers are over here. If you don't have honey supers on, you can do these other treatments. So it's kind of a good flow chart here to help guide you as to what you want to choose for your treatment method. And I tell you, this is all so complicated. I can understand how it's overwhelming. Trying to figure out what to treat with, when to treat, how to treat, and if you should treat. So it's not a small part of being a beekeeper. You really have to understand how to do all this stuff. I want to finish just with a couple slides that came out of Judy Wu's presentation. She kind of had a nice summary here of the various chemical controls. These up here are synthetic ones, and you can have residues from these chemicals accumulate in your wax, which is a concern. There are some organic products, the oxalic acid and the Mite Away quick strips or formic acid. Those leave less or no residues in the comb. And there's also some essential oil-based products that can also leave residues, and I'm not sure if those are truly as effective, but if you really want to go that route, those are available too. She also gave a link to this other table that's far more inclusive, and I know you can't read any of this. I don't expect you to, but if you click on this link from your downloaded presentation, and this is an excellent chart to have, because it lists all the various treatments, how much the cost per hive is to treat, how long the length of treatment is, whether you can have honey supers on. It's a very comprehensive table. I'd really recommend everybody download this table and print it out, have it on hand. Here's a couple slides that are not, if you downloaded the presentation, I added them at the last minute before, after they were uploaded to our website. I wanted to talk just a bit about mite-resistant bee stocks, because a lot of people want to buy them and they think they're going to solve all their mite problems. What's interesting, I found this article very interesting, and it's something, again, I would recommend reading. There are some pockets of mite-resistant bees that have developed naturally. They're in areas where there hasn't been a lot of intervention by us humans, and not a lot of treated bees, so the wild bees have kind of been left on their own to die off. The ones that had some ability to survive, reproduce, passed on their genetics, and over time have developed some degree of resistance. One of those pockets is here in Primorsky, Russia. If anybody buys Russian bees, that's where these came from. This is also, I believe, where the mites first made the jump from the Apis cerana that lives right in here. When people started bringing Apis mellifera in here, they crossed over, and that's where the mites made the jump to our honeybees. But that was a long time ago. So the bees here have had longer to I wouldn't say adjust, but to evolve and develop behaviors that allow them to deal with the mites. So that's why the Russian bees are one of the types you can get that have some degree of resistance to mites. They've learned how to deal with them to some extent. There's some other pockets around the world. What I would say is mite-resistant bee stocks are absolutely not a silver bullet. You can't just throw some Russian bees in a hive and walk away and say, oh, I don't have to worry about mites. Typically, their resistance is effective in a natural environment when you have low colony density. And that means that the hives in the nature, bee colonies are hundreds of yards apart. They're not right next to each other like we have. So if you have a whole bunch of hives sitting right next to each other, if you have some Russian bees sitting right next to some infected hives, the invasion is going to be too much for them probably. Or if they happen to rob out a colony that collapsed from mites, that would also cause a spike in mites. That might be too much at that point. Having said that, research from breeding is ongoing. There's the VSH bees that Mike sold some nukes like that this year. There's the Purdue ankle biter bees, where the bees have learned to chew off the ankles of the mites. The Russian bees, the Saskatraz, there's some other ones. We can't really wait for our bees just to naturally develop, these behaviors. So that's what these various researchers are doing, is they're trying to breed for these traits and develop bees that more aggressively deal with the mites themselves. It seems like a little bit of a panacea that we can get there someday, that we might have bees that are 100% resistant to mites. We'll see. It may not be in our lifetime. It's hard to tell. A lot of us are kind of old, I guess. But it's something that's important that's going on. Again, if you do get some of these bees, and I bought a Russian nuke this year just to try it out, keep an eye on them, maybe see if they have less mites than your other bees, but you're still going to have to watch to see if you still need to treat if you have them close to other bees. All right, summary. Varroa mites will kill your bees. If you do nothing, your bees are toast. I'm sorry to say that. Again, I'll say you need to monitor and then treat if your monitor shows a 3% or more infestation, and then monitor again after you treat to make sure that you've actually done something. As a beekeeper, I strongly encourage you to educate yourself as much as possible about Varroa. What I told you today is truly just the tip of the iceberg. I'm hoping it got you interested in getting more and better information than what I provided you. Timing, I really think that August-September timeframe is critical. If you're only going to treat once, I would make it at the end of July, so that your August and September bees are healthy. And lastly, never, ever, 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 ever read somebody's post on Facebook and use that as information to put chemicals in your hive. You just can't trust what's on Facebook. Honestly, a lot of people have good intentions, but I've seen some bad posts out there that would cause most of your bees to die. So go to one of these authorities like a Randy Oliver, or somebody that really spends some time on making sure the information is accurate, and go get the right numbers out of there. That's just my own little soapbox there, I guess. Anyhow, thank you very much for your time. I hope this was helpful for you, and we'll go from there. We'll go to Q&A at this point. So if anybody has questions, we're going to open it up. Anything about the presentation you can ask, or anything about beekeeping in general, especially any of you that are newer beekeepers that might be seeing some things for the first time.
Brad, did you touch anything on what I've heard and read a lot about, just putting drone comb in there, and when they get fully, capped, and you pull it out and freeze it to get rid of mites also?
That is something that people do as part of an IPM, or integrated pest management treatment. You can certainly do that. The Varroa mites like to go under the drone comb. The two problems I've had is, one, I bought a couple of those green frames that are the drone comb size frames, and for some reason those bees just will not draw out wax on those frames. I don't know why. They work on every other frame. But it does work. Just bear in mind that it reduces your mite population a little bit, not a lot. So you have to keep doing it over and over. multiple frames in your hive will have drone comb too. So bear that in mind. But it is something that people do, Bob, but I think it needs to be done in conjunction with other treatments.
So Brad and Bob, so just because you put the drone frame in to get mites to go into the drone brood, and the drone brood allows for more mites to go into the drone brood, it does not prevent the mites from going into your worker brood. So you're only solving half the problem. So it can be a piece of your management, but it cannot be all of your management, because it doesn't stop it from going into the worker brood. It just might encourage, and encourage might even be the wrong word. It allows for a drone to go into a different place that you can pull out and freeze that you don't care about, but the brood is still infected. The worker brood is still infected. I should say infested, not infected, sorry.
All right, any more questions?
Yeah,
Brad, you have a question in chat from Marty Crowley asking, where can you get info about caging a queen?
About caging a queen?
Yes. I think
So-
it's talking about your Italian queen cages.
So again, I would go back and look at that video by Ralph Bushler. He spends a fair amount of time talking about caging a queen and how to do it. Again, I bought some of those Italian queen cages. I'm going to try them out for the first time this year. They look like they work pretty well. But I would watch that video. I thought was really where I learned most of my information. Does that answer your question, Marty? Marty, did that answer your question?
yeah,
Yeah,
it did
You
answer.
chatted back, yes.
I
Oh, there.
I also had a question earlier for you. If you're treating the hive with that syringe solution that you showed us,
Uh-huh.
you have 2 brood boxes. You do each of them separately or just the top brood box?
If you have 2 brood boxes, you need to do them both. So
Okay.
basically, you lift the top one off, you treat the bottom one, and then you set the top one back on and do the top one.
Okay, thank you.
And it really helps if you have someone like Brad Sumter along with you, because I make him hold the box while I'm doing the treatment. So he has
Yeah,
to be able to
I
hit
heard they weigh a little bit.
The only qualification is weak mind, strong back. That's the only qualification.
Thank
Maybe
you.
he's going to get back at me this year, and I'll have to lift the boxes, and he'll do the trickle treatment. I see.
So Brad, you did talk about the syringe.
Nice.
That's the syringe that Brad's
Yeah.
talking about. He almost got the name of the company correct. Tractor Supply Company is
There
one
we
of the
go.
places that you can get these things. And as he was saying here, there's a setting right here that allows you pull this back when you load it, and then it allows for 5 milliliters at a time. If that's what your setting is on this piece right here, you may not be able to see it, but highly recommended. And basically it's 1 squirt between each of the frames. And if you happen to use a needle, use a blunt needle, not a sharp needle. You definitely don't want to inject this into your hand. So you don't necessarily need the needle, but if you feel like you do. The other thing is to practice with it, because there's a tendency to squeeze the trigger and pull along the frames, and you didn't do it right, and you give a second dose. And you really, again, you're working basically with what's going to be a pesticide to kill the mite. And the more you give, eventually you're going to give enough that's going to impact the bees. So you do need to practice with it a little bit. It's not that hard to learn, but when you're first doing it, you can get out of sequence when you do it. But very effective tool, very easy to load, about 80 milliliters. So you can do at least a box worth, maybe a box and a half per fill up, based on what you read. So that's the device, and it's called. There it is, Producer's Pride. Just go to the veterinary supply section of Tractor Supply, and they've got them there. They run about $26 or $27.
Thanks, Mike. And they have the blunt needles there too to use. So I found mine there. I see Johnny Lynn's got her hand up. Let's unmute her. Hold on, Johnny. You're not unmuted.
Unmute.
There we go.
Okay. So my box is new. My hive is new this year. Are the chances of having Varroa mites still pretty good for a first year hive?
You know, it's a real crapshoot.
Yeah.
It really depends. If you got a package of bees, some producers will spray their packages with oxalic acid to treat them before they sell them to you, in which case they should be very, very clean as far as mites.
I got a nuke.
For nukes, it depends on how they were raised, I believe. Like with mine, I actually put the frames in with the queen cell and let the queen mate and come back. They actually go through their own little mini brood break in the spring. So they should be relatively low, but if somebody just takes a mated queen and throws it in a nuke with some capped brood, that nuke could be starting off with a fair number of mites. So the answer to your question is I don't know. That's why you have to monitor. I think you have a reasonable chance that they're decent your first year, but I would not risk it. I would do the sugar roll or the alcohol wash and sometime in late July and see what you got going on.
Okay. All right. And I assume on those websites it talks about how you're going to collect these 300 bees, because I'm thinking one, two, that's not the way it goes.
Absolutely. The scientific beekeeping guy, Randy Oliver, he's got a really nice video and shows how to shake the bees into a plastic tub, then you use a half cup measure and scoop them up. And it sounds scary. And,
yes, it does.
It was when we first started. But what's kind of interesting, especially if you're getting brood frames with younger worker bees on them, the nurse bees, when you shake them into that tub, they're so disoriented, they're not angry. There'll be bees flying around, but for the most part, they're not in a stinging mood at that point.
Okay.
For the most part, I say that.
Yeah, okay.
And I have been stung, but it works pretty well once you shake them into a plastic tub. The ones that can't fly are stuck down in there, and that's the ones you scoop up. The ones that can fly, they go up, and they're trying to find their way back home.
Right.
But it's a little scary because you got bees going all over the place.
Yeah, there may be stories to tell.
And, well, if they start stinging, that's when I send Brad Sumter in, and then I back away. He's my surrogate stinger.
I'll introduce myself to Brad. Okay. All right. Thank you. Good information you gave.
Okay,
Thank
good.
you.
Brad, you got some questions in chat there.
Okay. I'll have my chat up.
Okay, so the first one talks about the Megan Milbrath stuff from Michigan State. Lecture series recommended Hop Guard as a season-long way to reduce numbers. And then I guess the question is, does anyone have any experience using the Hop Guard or Hop Guard 2, I think it is?
I do not. I've not used Hop Guard. Anybody else?
I have my bees at a hop yard, but that doesn't work.
Okay. And then you have another question that says, is there a max temperature for the oxalic acid drip? It says, using oxalic acid drip for swarms caught in the summer, is there a risk at high temperatures?
Boy, I don't know the answer at a high temperature. There is some information out there about spraying packages, and I would say spraying a swarm is very similar to spraying a package. You might Google up spraying a package with oxalic acid and see if you can find anything. I think what I've found on those, they had you spray them and then keep them in a cool, dark area for a day. Does anybody else recall reading something like that? I apologize, I don't know the answer on that one, but I think Google will help you out on that. But again, I wouldn't do anything with bees if it's above 90 degrees anyhow. I'd wait for a cooler evening or a nicer day to do it.
So Ken had a question. Ken, go ahead.
Go ahead,
Really
Ken.
was a question. You were talking about gathering the 300 bees, and I watched different videos on it, and it seems like trying to get 300 bees to cooperate and go into a jar is like herding cats. And so I come up with a system that really is, it's probably a little more effort than some of you might want to go through, but I'll try to show it to you here. It's I don't know if you can see this or not, but it's a dust, one of those dust vacs. And I set it up to where I can draw into a quart jar. And
nice.
so what I do is I pull a frame out that's got, brood on, so obviously nurse bees are there. And I can just vacuum up 300, I know about where in the quart jar the line is for 300 bees. So it's a very controlled method of gathering bees rather than some of the methods I've seen. So
Nice. That's pretty ingenious, Ken. I like that. One thing you just made me think of, though, while you're doing that, or with any of the ways that you're getting the 300 bees, don't get your queen.
yeah.
Absolutely not. If you're doing the alcohol wash, you just killed your queen. And I really wouldn't want her in the jar with all the heat and the powdered sugar either. One reason, anytime I find a queen, I mark her. So all my queens are marked. That doesn't mean I'm not going to accidentally get her, but it increases my odds of safely avoiding her.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, Brad. So you have another question in chat from Rick Holdcroft. He says, the formic acid method discussed last week seems easier. What's the advantage of oxalic acid over formic acid?
I'll take one stab at it, then I'm sure there's other opinions. I've used formic acid over the years, and I've had varying degrees of success with it. It definitely is very temperature sensitive as to what temperatures it's effective at. It depends on how much ventilation you got going through your hive, so whether the formic acid vapors stay within the hive and work. I've also, personally, I've had this happen, and I've read of others having happen, that it seemed to cause some queen issues. I'm not trying to bash a certain product or anything, but I had a lot of my hives re-queen themselves after applying formic acid last year. And I had some surprise queens in the spring too. Even on the companies like the Formic Pro, the company that sells it, if you look on their product page at the Q&A, they say it's not unusual to end up with 2 queens in your hive after a formic acid treatment. So it's made me a little leery about it. It is easier just to put the strips, lay the strips in your hive and walk away. So that's the oxalic acid. I don't think you're going to have any queen issues at all myself. But they're just different ways of doing it. And it is important not to use the same treatment year after year. You do want to rotate treatments. We're all trying to fight that resistance characteristic in the mites. So I kind of gave you a long-winded another I don't know, but that's one reason I've stepped away from formic acid a little bit. And anybody else on the formic acid?
Hey, with formic acid, you normally can do that with your supers in place, right?
Yes, you can.
And so, I guess with oxalic acid dribble, it's not a problem. But if you're doing oxalic acid vaporization, that's a difference. That's one thing.
Well, it's a dribble, you don't want your supers on either, because you don't want to have to be dribbling in directly into the supers. So generally, it's recommended to take the supers off too.
Good point.
Have Brad hold those for you too.
Yeah, Brad, can you hold 2 supers and a brood box while I inspect the bottom box here for mites?
That's another good reason for 8-frame equipment.
By the way, I'm looking for a new apprentice. Anybody else want to lift boxes for me? How's everybody else doing with their nukes, their packages? Any questions, problems, things not related to mites, or? Looks like Kealia. I'm gonna. Did I say that right?
It's my wife's account, Kalia. Yeah.
Oh.
How I got 2 nukes this year, and they're still drawing out comb. Is it a problem if I continue to feed for another few weeks, or should I really be getting away from feeding at this point?
I was waiting for Brad to jump in there.
I'm trying to avoid the question.
I guess my question is, what are you doing about honey supers? Do you have honey supers in your hive?
No, I'm trying to get them to fill out 2 brood boxes, and I've just given up on honey this year. My hope is next year.
Then I think you're okay to keep feeding them. So if you had honey supers, that would be a different answer. But if you're not putting honey supers on, you can feed them if you want. You just make sure you're keeping an eye on them, because if you continue to feed them, they build too much wax. Or at a certain point, they'll start to think about swarming. They're not from the wax, but I mean, I don't think it's an issue. But I think as long as you're not trying to put a honey super on there, you're probably okay to feed them for a while longer.
Okay.
Are you seeing a decreased number of bees, or do you have you tried moving a foundation frame over, or a comb frame, empty comb frame over, to encourage the queen to lay more?
I haven't. I'm planning on going out this afternoon, so I could do that. I could try that.
So yeah, don't move a lot around, but you may want, if you can find a frame of comb that's basically empty. Don't take something that's full of honey, but if you've got something that's fairly empty, to include a frame of foundation if that's all you have, and you might want to put it over toward the brood nest to see if they'll build that out and give her more place to lay. And again, what you're in is this cycle. So everybody hears that a queen lays 1,000, 1,500, or 2,000 eggs a day, and I've never counted them, so let's call it 1,500 and call it even. Initially, she doesn't lay that many eggs because she doesn't have the support staff to support that. So it's kind of like she's got to build up the support staff, and then she starts laying more eggs and build up the support staff. Do you have access to any additional brood from a hive from last year or anything where you could steal a frame of brood or something?
No, this is my first year, 2 hives, so.
So there's a concept called a brood bomb. And if you get to the point where you're trying to stop a swarm, you may actually wind up building your own nuke in July or August. You may actually, at the end of July, let's say, you might find that all of a sudden they build up and there's a lot of bees in there, and you want to slow that down a little bit to keep them from swarming. That's the goal of the beekeeper is to keep their bees from swarming, or at least control the swarm. But anyway, so you can easily wind up with frames of brood that are just basically pack sealed brood. And if you go through the life cycle of a bee, if you have a frame, a deep frame, there's 3,500 cells per side, so 7,000 cells. And let's say it's 95% capped. Every once in a while, you'll pull a frame out and you'll just go, wow, why couldn't they all look like this, right? So if you have one of those and you're able to insert that into a hive that's a little bit slow, what you've got is 7,000 new bees showing up in the next 11 days. And those are all nurse bees. So if you're struggling, give me a call, private message me or something on Facebook. Let's see, yeah, my name shows up there. So just get a hold of me, and maybe I can find a frame of brood or something, or a couple of frames of brood, put one in each of your hives if they don't start cheering up a little bit, say by the 4th of July or something. Give me a call after the 4th, and we'll see if we can add something. And usually a lot of people will blame it on the queen, but it's kind of like, it's more, if you can get the hive kick-started, that queen will just take off. And in the end, it may be that you do have to replace the queen.
Okay, thank you, appreciate that.
I think Mike touched on it, but I just wanted to clarify one thing I talked about with the swarming or whatever. I think it's okay to feed them as long as they're building out that wax. Once all your frames are drawn out, if they start backfilling all those frames, some is okay, but if they backfill them all with that sugar and put it in the frames, there's no place left for the queen to lay, and that's an issue. That'll be a big problem. So that's why I think as all your frames are drawn out, I would look to maybe stop feeding sugar.
But one other note on feeding, I guess, is one, when it's warm temperatures like this, your sugar syrup is definitely going to want to get mold and mildew in it fairly quickly. There's a number of different approaches. People either put a teaspoon or 2 of vinegar or bleach in their sugar syrup to try and prevent that. It seems to be okay for the bees. The other thing you want to be careful on is, we're in a honey flow or a nectar flow right now, so there's plenty of nectar around. If we enter a dearth and other bees are desperate to find nectar, you definitely have more increased chances of robbing. And if they smell that sugar syrup, if you spill any around your hive, or if it's in a place that it encourages robbing, you're definitely more susceptible to that if you have sugar syrup in your hive then. And I would guess, I don't know.
Thank you.
The expert around here on our nectar flows. Are we gonna peter out here in July sometime?
I've got a question about marking a queen.
Yes.
I'm not brave like some of you guys are.
Oh, we lost your audio, Ken. Hold on a second. We need to unmute you again. Go ahead, Ken.
I was saying that I'm not brave like some of you guys are that will, just use your fingers and grab a queen and all that. I use, it's one of those devices that you put over the queen, and then you can slide the little side thing down to where it captures her in there. Then you push her up, to where you can then mark her through that thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I use. But sometimes it's a little tricky in getting that over the queen or whatever. I was working with a hive yesterday, actually my neighbor, and I attempted to do that, and I didn't get her, under there. And next thing you know, I look and I don't see the queen. Is it possible that the queen could fly off from being harassed like that? And if she did, would she come back to the hive? Or I guess I don't understand that.
Was she a very young or possibly a virgin queen?
Well, this was a nuke. He had obtained this nuke. I don't know, maybe 4 weeks ago, something like that. So I mean, it's a nuke that's building up.
Yeah.
So
if she's a mated queen and she's laying, she's too heavy to fly very far. She could fly a short distance. So it's possible she flew out and landed in the grass or something nearby. She'll certainly try to get back in, but it's not a guarantee. I think there's probably a better chance she probably just escaped and ran off somewhere inside the hive, but that's just guessing.
Well, I hope that's the case. I told him, I says, well, I'll check the hive in about 4 days or so, and if I don't see any fresh eggs in there,
yeah,
and I'll know that she's not there anymore, because what's laid there as of yesterday should have hatched out into a larvae already, so I would know whether she's still present or not.
Right.
But one thing to remember, whenever you have an issue where you think the queen may have flown off, and I've seen this a couple of times, and it's worked for me, but the queen normally does not fly. So when she leaves the hive, she's going to turn around and navigate. Just like the foragers, the first time the foragers fly, they turn around and navigate. And the one thing that she remembers about your hive is there's this big, gigantic, abominable snowman standing right next to her hive. So the last thing you want to do is close that hive up and go to the next hive, because she's going to navigate back towards you. So stand there for about 5 minutes.
Okay.
And hope. Now, you may not see her. I was fortunate enough once to see the queen come back, and then the second time I found her on an inspection later. But one time I actually watched the queen come right back. She doesn't want to be out flying. She doesn't have her support staff with her. She wants to be back in that hive, but just don't move that landmark, which is you.
Okay.
Yeah, don't move the landmark. Just stand there and just wait for 5 minutes.
Well, I did that. I mean, we had the hive open for some time standing there, and I was trying to go back through the frames just to see if I could find her or see her. And I don't know if she maybe snuck down, onto the sides of the box or whatever, which you wouldn't see her pulling a frame out. But I also tried not to move about so that I wouldn't accidentally step on her if she was like on the ground. And I kind of cautiously looked around me on the ground to see if I could possibly see her, and I did not see her. So,
Mike, did that queen follow you all the way home? So she was orientated to you, and she started walking away. You're right, Ken. Once you harass them, they tend to start running around a lot too. So she could have gone off and hidden somewhere. Hopefully that's the case.
I'm hoping that's the case, and she didn't actually fly off or whatever. And so that was the basis of my question: is if she did fly off, would she attempt to come back? And the hive was open for probably a good, 15 minutes or better. So she, if she flew back, I didn't see it, but.
So Brad, is that it for this? And then we'll do a board. I think we have one board member on that I can see. Are you good? Are you done, Brad?
I'm all done. I don't have anything else. Go right ahead.
Yeah, hold on just a second. Let me pause this recording. I'm going to stop the recording and start a new one. Hold on just a second.